Hey everyone, we're gonna do a nice scene from a mountain town from up in Northern California today. So let's just get right into it. I already have my sketch laid out here. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna pre-wet the sky portion of the paper. Most of this is going to end up being covered by these trees, but I want to lay the sky in first so that when I go back and paint the trees, you'll be able to see the sky showing through in some spots. It's going to be just a pretty simple sky color. Getting lighter as it moves towards the horizon, even though the trees are covering it, we still want to maintain that realism. I'm mixing up the color as I go. Adding in a few different things here and there just to keep it more nuanced and interesting. And those little chirps you're hearing are my parrot, who is currently sitting on my shoulder. That is his favorite place in the entire universe to be, just hanging out on my shoulder. His name is Ralph, and he is a Myers parrot. So if you want to look up a picture of a Myers parrot, they're a pretty interesting looking bird, and they're very rare here in the States, but I ended up adopting him, so I have a Myers parrot. And just like that, the sky is in. We're going to paint the color of this rooftop. Don't know if I remember what town I was in when I took this picture. I think it was, I don't know. Might have been a place called Eagle Lake, I think. Way out in the middle of nowhere. Which are some of my favorite kinds of places to explore, the middle of nowhere places. Very interesting and unique. Places that most people would never even think to explore. That's where I like to go. To make that green a little more vibrant, so I added a bit more yellow and some of that cobalt turquoise. I think that's what that color is. Just drop in some gray color for the road. Something like that. More gray for this trailer. Make it a slightly different tone of gray just to give it more separation from the color of the road. Leaving out some random white spots for some nice incidental highlights. Gives the illusion of more detail than there actually is without you having to do a ton of extra work. Just some random cool colors in there. It's a little too vibrant, so I'm just gonna spread that around. Whenever things like that would happen before, I would get super panicky and think the painting was ruined, but it's not. Not even close. And it actually might make it a little more interesting having those unexpected shades thrown in there. Mix up some reddish, warm colors for these background roofs and buildings here. At this stage, I like to let the colors kind of bleed into each other a little bit. Take full advantage of that aspect of watercolor, the fact that you can let the colors bleed and flow together. So you see this grass kind of flows into the shade on the wall. And the first wash is where you really want to let that happen, because it'll give you a really nice under layer to paint over top of, and it can be very interesting and dynamic when you do it that way. Just grab some more green, just adding some yellow back into these colors I already have laying here to make it a little more interesting, more vibrant. I'm a big fan of using what I already have on the palette. And actually, I rarely clean off my palette. I'll clear a space out if I need it, but I find that some of the most interesting colors I've mixed are because there's unexpected colors that I would normally not use that are already laying here. Okay, that is the first wash done. Now we will move into the second wash. I'm just trying to figure out where I want to start. I think I'm going to start with this big, I think this is a spruce tree if I'm not mistaken. It's something that we don't have here in Phoenix. I know that for sure. The desert is a beautiful place, but I always love seeing huge trees like that because you just don't get them here, so maybe the fact that we don't have them here makes it so that I appreciate that kind of thing more than maybe somebody who grew up in a place with huge trees would. Nice dark, rich green for this. Tons of different kinds of blue thrown in there, and then different yellows as well. I'm keeping in mind where the edge of the tree is, because I do want that corner of sky showing. And also remembering to not block in this entire area with just green. I want to leave some space for the sky to show through. You see how easy that was? Just varying my brush strokes, using different angles of the brush, different kinds of strokes. Just like that, you've got a tree. It took like, what, 10 seconds? I used to be pretty afraid of painting trees. Well, I used to be afraid of painting everything. But it's not as hard as you would think it is once you get the trick down. Now these trees in the background, well, first before I do that, I would like to add some more darks into this cedar here while it's still wet. Just to give it a little sense of volume. Oh, here, even darker than that. A little sense of volume just immediately. And that this wet into wet technique will let me get some really nice, soft shadows that will naturally blend in with the paint that's already there. And if you hear people talking in the background, that's because I do live on a ground floor apartment next to the pool, so you'll probably hear random people walking by. Okay, so I'm happy with how that's looking so far. So now to the background trees. For these, in the reference photo, they look the same exact value as this foreground tree, and I'm going to actually maintain the same value, but I'm going to try to create a little bit of separation by adding more blue, and that will give the impression that these trees sit farther in the background. I'm going to paint a little bit lighter than this foreground tree. Right now they don't look lighter, but when I do my third wash, where I put in the darkest colors, they will look quite a bit lighter. But I don't know, maybe I won't do that. I haven't decided yet. Most of me painting is making decisions as I go. Just paying attention to how the scene is unfolding on the paper and then making adjustments as I go. because I'm realizing that I like how dark the background trees are because it makes this really light roof just pop. So I think I'm gonna actually try to maintain that effect. This tree in the foreground will still be darker though, so I think I can give the sense that these trees are farther away, and then also maintain this equal value that runs from this tree to the background trees and then into these shadows, and that'll help me get that nice big connected mid-value shape. And that's usually what I'm trying to do, is get that big mid-value shape, because that just makes the painting read so much better. And I am painting around a few areas where I would like, like the transformer and the light are very light in the picture, so I don't want to cover that up because watercolor is transparent, so you can't really paint light onto dark like you can in oil or acrylic. And I'm trying to be very loose and expressive and fast with my brush strokes, like yeah. And hopefully still get across that this is a pine tree. Just gonna drop the trunks in too. Okay. Now, keeping in mind that I'm trying to connect these shapes, I'm looking at, okay, this part is still wet, so I'm going to connect this shape to the roof, which is in shadow here. Ralph is giving me feedback as I go. You like the painting, Ralph? Yeah? I think he likes it. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I try to paint around this pole if I can. It needs to be darker. You do want to try to get the exact value you're after the first time, because if you paint too many layers, you will lose the vibrancy of the paint. Some people paint that way, tons of layers. I used to do that too, but I prefer to try to get it down to 3 layers at most, sometimes 4 if I need to glaze over something. It's always a challenge. It's not easy to do, but it's something I'm constantly working on, and I'm getting that dappled edge of the shadow in there too. And we'll just work right down to the roof. And the great thing about watercolor is the color that is underneath, the first wash will show through. Even if you don't necessarily notice it, it will tint the layer of paint that you put above it. Painting around that trailer because that trailer is standing out in very sharp contrast to that building behind it. These are all things that that just pop out to me and catch my eye as I'm out and about. Just contrast between light and dark, warm and cool. The way light hits whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be a beautiful mountain or a sunset or an ocean or whatever. I like painting those things too. But I really love painting these mundane, seeming everyday scenes that most people would never even think to stop and appreciate. I used to struggle really hard with, I just don't know what to paint. What do I paint? What do I paint? What do I paint? For a long time, that was the hardest thing for me. I just didn't know what to paint until I, with enough time and practice, was able to train my eye to be able to see things in a different way, to see things in terms of light and dark, and not necessarily what the thing itself was that I was looking at. It's like I've painted, dumpsters, trash cans, things that other people might consider to be ugly, or that even I might have considered to be ugly at some point. But the way the light was hitting the trash can or the dumpster was just beautiful. So I paint it, and it works. Not necessarily something that would be put up in a gallery somewhere, painting of a dumpster, but I'm not trying to get into a gallery. I'm just painting because I'm painting what I want to paint. I guess what I meant by this trailer stands out in contrast to this house is the top of the roof is actually almost pure white in the painting, so at the end I'm going to go over that again with gouache to get that highlight back. And that's always a good thing to look for in a scene, is places where there's something light in front of something dark, or vice versa, because that will just create a nice focal point. Now, I've got a nice bluish, dark gray blue color mix up for this shadow underneath the trailer. Another thing I love is interesting shadows. I really enjoy painting shadows. Shadows are what give things their form. It's what makes them look three-dimensional in space. And that's what makes us as artists able to create the illusion of a three-dimensional object on a flat piece of paper, is the shadows. Now, something to keep in mind when you're creating this one big connected value shape is to try your best to connect the edge of one shape to the next before it dries. Like, this is already dry, but it's so small that nobody will notice. And so, just gonna connect that and touch it. Connect it to this shadow back here. Work up the roof. And once again, the tonal quality and the value is so much more important than exactly matching the color, which is, when I was first starting out, I was very worried about, how am I going to get this color exactly right? But it turns out that doesn't matter. What's more important is warm and cool, and how intense or in other words, how light or dark the value is that you're using. Now I'm going to paint the shadow underneath the roof here, which is actually a little warmer. Add some more warmth to it while it's still wet. And Ralph is biting my ear. Well, he's not biting, he's nibbling. What do you want, Ralph? I'm not paying enough attention to him in the moment, so he's demanding scritches. He loves the scritches until he doesn't, and he's had enough. Then he'll let you know real quick if he's done. Gonna just drop that trunk in. Makes it a nice dark color. And as I'm doing that, I'm adding in a little texture right here at this boundary to show the grass, which is actually lit up. Yeah, like that. Okay, now I gotta figure out how to connect this over here. So we're gonna do that. Now it's connected. Get a little more blue in here for the cast shadow of this beautiful tree. And this shadow is going to cover the entire page, just like that. And that dry brush technique will give you these little gaps in the shadow, which gives the impression of light passing through these needles and then hitting the ground. Just gonna make parts of this a little darker here. Darken up these windows. And this vent. The darker the shadows are, the lighter the light will be. Just increasing the contrast where I think it needs it. gonna just put in a few little hints here of this trunk, which can barely be seen through these thick needles. So I'm not just gonna paint it straight through, and I'm not gonna paint it super dark because it's hidden. I'm gonna darken up the right side of this tree since the light is coming from this direction. And I'm darkening it, not using green. I'm actually using this nice blue, dark blue gray color. So a lot of blue in trees, it turns out, especially in the shadow areas, which you wouldn't necessarily expect there to be blue in trees, right? That is one of the amazing things that I've learned from painting, is how complex the world is as far as how many colors there are contained in everything. Even really simple seeming things are just packed with color. It needs to be even a little darker than that in some areas, because the tree is the closest thing to us besides the road. And because it's still wet, we'll get some nice soft shadows going on. Don't be afraid to go really dark in watercolor. That is something almost every watercolor beginner struggles with, including me when I was a beginner. I never went dark enough, and I was always like, why don't my paintings look very good? They always looked faded and washed out, and well, it's because I wasn't going dark enough. Because remember, watercolor always dries lighter. So, as the great Andy Evenson says, if it looks good and right when you first put it on the paper, it's probably wrong. Because it hasn't dried yet, and it's going to be too light, and you'll be frustrated. I'm just using my fingernail to put some light branches in here. Just a few. I'm not going to go overboard. We're getting pretty close to done, I think. I would like to exaggerate the redness of this roof, so I'm going to do a glaze of just pure red, not too thick. Just enough to make this roof pop a little more than it does. And I'm actually making it more red than it appears in the reference photo. And that'll also make it stand out a little more from the background buildings. It needs a little more than that, I think. Yeah, you know what? Whatever. We're just going to make it super red. That actually looks really nice. It's okay to take risks when you're painting, because oh yeah, that looks way better. Like way better. I like that a lot. And this also helps push back these buildings more into the background. Now, second wash is done. I'm happy with that. Ralph seems happy with that. So, the final wash will be for the darkest areas. It's really easy to go overboard in this step. So don't kill all of your lights, just a touch of dark where it needs it, and that's it. Just a few little spots on this tree. In the trunk. Just to help give it a little more texture than it had. Yeah, and that brought that tree even farther forward. I'm also going to darken parts of these windows. I'm just going to kind of tap my brush. Same with this vent. Some areas under here. I'm not necessarily painting any specific shape. I'm just kind of doing random strokes to, once again, the illusion of detail. These tires. It's just fascinating to me how the most mundane, ordinary, everyday things can become magical in a painting. I'm just looking and seeing if there's anything else I need to darken up. I'm actually going to make this pole dark instead of light, like it is in the photo. And I'll add a little highlight in gouache along the edge of it. I think that'll work out nice. So I'm squinting my eyes and I'm looking, and yeah, I really like the way this looks. I'm just gonna make these trunks stand out a tiny bit more, because you can't really see them that clearly. Okay. Last step. Highlights. I'm going to be using pure titanium white artist gouache straight from the tube. This tube will last me like for the next 10 years at least. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that, because, I mean, just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. I'm going to brighten this transformer up. And again, this should be used extremely, extremely sparingly. Gouache is opaque watercolor, which means you can paint light over dark, which is why I can put in these highlights after the fact, and I don't have to worry about painting around every single tiny thing, because ain't nobody got time for that. Yeah, and then getting this white shine on the roof here. That's nice. That's really nice. And you see how that stands out in really sharp contrast from the dark background. And then, yeah, the top of this wheel well too. Just a few on the roof, just to make it sparkle. That's a light area of the roof that I accidentally covered up before. But it's okay, because I can just paint over it with gouache. And final step. Nice little splatter, makes it nice and sparkly. We are just about finished. Just gotta throw my signature on there. So there you have it. I am quite happy with how this turned out. It's very fun to paint, very satisfying. The combination of very dark and very light all mixed together. So, if you're interested in learning more, please stick around because I have a lot more to show you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.